Hi Booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be doing the Used Bookstore Tag. It's a tag created by Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading. I'll have her original video down below, and she was kind enough to tag me in her original video. And it's a tag all about used bookstores, as the title suggests. And there are some questions here about credit at used bookstores and the credit policy and things like that. And the reason that's in there is because Kelly's got a very particular history with one of her bookshops near her with their used book credit policy. And if you want to sort of find out more about that drama, you can go and watch her original video. So we'll jump right in, and the first prompt is, what is your favourite or most often visited used bookstore, and what sets it apart or makes it special? And this probably will be the only question where I go over the top and just can't give one answer. I'm quite lucky in that near me there are quite a few that I can get to, or that at least aren't too far away. I think generally in the UK, even if there isn't a used bookstore right around the corner from where you live, there's probably one, short bus journey away, or sort of within travelling distance, where maybe it's you can't just casually turn up, but you can turn it into a day out or something. So I think we're quite lucky in the UK in that respect, at least in most areas, as my experience goes. There's one used bookshop in my town where I live, and that's the closest one. I do visit it quite often, and I'm quite surprised by what they have in there. But I wouldn't say it's my favourite, but that's my closest one, and I'm not buying books at the moment. I've put myself on a book buying diet, but when I am buying books, I go there often, and often just go by to see what they have, and so that's my sort of local used bookshop. And there are a number of charity shops around that have lots of books in them, and there's a independent bookshop that sells new books, but they've got like a little free library just outside in the doorway. And so just in my town I have a few options of where I can find books, and then historically for a long time my favourite used bookshop, and just my favourite bookshop, has been a bookshop called Troutmark's in Cardiff. And when I was living in Cardiff, I could just walk down there, and I still work in Cardiff, and so it's about a 20-minute walk from where I work, and so it's difficult to go there after work because they close at 5, and so it's sort of impossible to get there then. And I can just about get there during my lunch break, but it only gives me 15-20 minutes of browsing time, so it's not that much time. And so recently it's always been a bit of a rush to get there, but that's a long time been my favourite. But there are tons of other bookshops in the UK that I love, and I'm sort of able to visit periodically. So one fun thing, I suppose, is that I'm only about an hour drive away from Hay-on-Wye, and so I can sort of drive up there for a day out, and my parents don't live too far away from there, so it's like a nice sort of place to meet up with them, and so that's another place I can go relatively regularly. It's sort of turning into a kind of tradition that we sort of go there every year, or at least the last 2 years we've gone sort of every autumn. And there are just 2 more bookshops I want to mention. They're bookshops I haven't been to in about 2 years, I think. and I don't go to them all that often, but I really like them because my wife's family live up in Cumbria, so right in the north of England, really close to the border with Scotland. Um, and in Carlisle, there's a great bookshop. I think it's like 3 stories. Called I think it's called Bookends, and there's just a massive sprawling secondhand bookshop, and there's also a section of it that's new books as well. And it's one of the few bookshops that I've seen that does that. So that's a really fun bookshop, and I always find interesting things there, and I could spend a whole day there. And then if you go over the coast, or over to the other coast to Northumbria, in a town called Alnwick, there's a great bookshop in a converted train station called Barter Books, and again, that's one of my all-time favourite bookshops. It's massive, and again, I always find something interesting there, and it's one of those bookshops that you just go into not expecting to find anything, but you might be surprised with what you find. So they're two of my all-time favourites up there in sort of right in the north of England. But there are some great bookshops here in South Wales as well. Um, so yeah, as you can tell, I don't really have a favourite. Number 2, does your used bookshop take credit? If so, how much credit do you get for your books, and do they give you cash for your books? My closest bookshop, they do buy books off you. Now, one fact about my local bookshop, which is part of why it's so easy to buy so many books there, is that every single book there, no matter how old, how collectible, how much disrepair it is, how big, how small, paperback, hard copy, anything, they're all £1. And so I'm imagining that if you went there to sell loads of books, they're probably not going to give you a lot of money for them, but they probably will take them. You sort of turn up there, and it does kind of look like the place that books go to die. There are just so many, and I don't think they ever get rid of any. They just leave them there until someone picks them up. So yeah, there's quite a lot there. But I don't think they give credit, but you might get 50p per book. So if you turn up with a massive bag full of books, you might get £10 or £20 or something. And the only other bookshop that I have known to take credit is Bookends up in Carlisle, and I only know that because my in-laws had some credit that they weren't going to use, and so they gave it to me, so I got to go and buy £20 of worth of books in that bookshop. I think the last time I was there. So yeah, they're the only sort of two sort of instances of I can think of as of bookshops that give credit or give you cash or anything like that. But I don't really know firsthand from a bookseller's point of view, because I've never actually given any books back to a secondhand bookshop. I've never sold books at a secondhand bookshop. I've only ever, I often just give them away at charity shops or something like that. I don't know. Once I'm set on getting rid of a book, I'm probably not thinking that much about making much money back. I don't really think like that, much to my detriment. Number 3 is, how often do you go to your used bookstore, and can you share how much credit you have there? So, as you can guess, I don't have any credit at any used bookstore, at least as far as I know. And I go, well, at the moment, never at all. But sort of generally, when I was buying books, I probably go into a used bookshop at least once or twice a month. yeah, roughly speaking. And whenever I was going somewhere, if I was going somewhere new or visiting family or something, if there was a bookshop nearby, I'd always try to make a detour. Yeah, it sort of averages out at about once a month, but at the moment I'm not. Doing my best not to visit any so that I don't get too tempted. Um, then number 4 is, what restrictions, if any, does your used bookstore have on how you can use your credit? And I don't know. I've never asked. I've never looked into it. That bookshop where I was given credit from my in-laws, um, they just gave you a little card, and they wrote how much credit you had on it, or maybe stamped it, or something like that. Um, and so as long as you could present them with the card, then you could use that much money, and presumably they would give you another card with the remainder. What if you didn't spend the whole thing? But they're happy. They were happy for you to use it on pretty much anything. I don't know if they had a restriction. It might have just been on used books. I can't remember, but certainly it's not like Kelly in her bookshop where you can only use your credit towards half of the total of the book, which is kind of crazy. The way I've always thought of credit in shops, my dad, I come from a very musical house. My dad had or still has a big CD collection, and he would sort of whittle down a bit and work out which CDs he wanted to get rid of, and then we'd go down to our local record shop, Cobb Records in Portmaddock, and we would go there. He would show them the CDs he wanted, and I think sometimes they would say, "Okay, we'll buy these ones off you. We don't want to buy these ones off you." I think they do that. But then that money would be his if he decided to walk out the door then, and just leave those CDs that they were going to take. I think they'd give him cash for it. They wouldn't even think of a kind of credit system. But invariably, my dad would then go and browse, and would often then sort of exceed the amount they were going to give him. And so it's a kind of win-win for everyone, because my dad would get rid of the space, and he would save, kind of save money, because that bundle of CDs he was bringing home with him cost him less than it would have had he not sold a few. And it's and then obviously the record shop then makes some profit, because they got some new stock in, and also the person they've got the stock in from is actually paying them a little more money. So it sort of works out for everyone, and it builds a relationship between the customer and the shop, and it's and they had a really good relationship. They'd save things under the counter for him that they think he might be interested in, and things like that. And I think that's the best way for for any kind of shop like that to work, particularly when it's secondhand, because it just seems transparent, and you're going to trust them, not only with selling things to them, but also then with what you buy from them, because again it's a two-way thing. So yeah, a bit of a ramble there, but I've never known of any. It's kind of where I'm going from that. My experiences have always been fairly straightforward, but there haven't been many. Number 5 is, how is your used bookstore organised? What do you like or dislike about how it's organised? So with this one, I'll sort of focus on the one that's closest to me, and amazingly, I don't even know its name. It's in the indoor market at Pontypridd, if you're ever there, and it's crammed with used books, and there are two sort of market stalls that it takes up, and it's not just like tables with books on them. They have dedicated spaces that are, for the business, and so they have bookshelves up there. and essentially it's just made up of two little mazes, essentially, that are, you've got bookshelves sort of crammed as close together as you can get them, books stacked on the floor in front of them, a rough alphabetical order, but you sort of get to the end of the alphabet somewhere and it kind of starts again, but you're not really in a new category, or at least that's how it's often been when I've gone there. And there's not really much of a heavy turnover. So I can, a while ago I turned up, I think it was about a year or so ago, and I saw The Fall of Constantinople by Stephen Runciman, and I didn't buy it, and I was kicking myself that I didn't buy it. And I turned up a good, I don't know whether it was 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, might have even been more than a month after, and it was still exactly, not only still in the shop, but I think exactly where I'd left it on the shelf. And in that shop, things get turned over and moved around all the time, or at least you'd sort of expect they do from the way from the way it looks. And I could notice that things had moved around it, but it hadn't left its spot. And so yeah, that gives you kind of an idea of the vibe of that shop. And it's split up into fairly obvious categories. I think as you walk in, it's the end that I tend to walk in from. The first thing that hits you is a whole section of religious books. I think probably from old sort of chapels and churches that have probably closed and things like that. I'm sort of guessing from the kind of area we're in. And then sort of next door to that, on the other side of the bookshelf, and sort of coming around in a kind of C shape and then back in on itself, so in this sort of almost like a G shape, if you can imagine that, is the literature sort of classics section with lots of classic fiction, a bit of poetry, and some drama, literary criticism, stuff like that. And some of it's very beaten up, but I found some fun editions of old sort of 1950s Penguin classics. So you're never sure, what you're going to find there. And then in front of that section is a section of sort of more of a focus on Welsh literature. And then around the corner from there is sort of non-fiction and history. And then there's a whole other sort of store with a maze of sort of espionage and thrillers and crime, historical fiction, horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and those sort of all blend into each other. And then at the far end of that section, there's romance, and there's quite a lot of romance there as well. So that's roughly how that bookshop is organised. I was going to go into how one of the other bookshops I like to go to is organised, but I've been talking for a while, so I'll keep going. What do I like or dislike about it, actually? I basically just don't like the fact that it's really messy, and there's a charm to a bit of messiness and a bit of disorder, but you just get the impression that you're sort of having people pouring through and spilling over these books, and they don't actually care about them, and that's sometimes the impression I get. Not necessarily that the proprietors don't care, but that you're getting lots of people who just lots of potential customers who don't really care about the books. And I'm not sure whether that's the case or not, but that's the impression I get. Number 6 is, what is the best find or deal you found in a used bookstore? And I found this book. It was at a holiday where it was just sort of used bookshop madness. We were on a holiday in Haworth, which is where the Brontes are from. And there's a gift shop in the Bronte parsonage, and I bought a book there. There are used bookshops then in Haworth, and I bought some books there. And then after a few days in Haworth, we drove sort of diagonally up to York and went to a used bookshop there, and then zigzagged back over to Carlisle to see my in-laws and went book shopping there, and then went across to Alnwick on the east coast and bought books there. And I bought so many books on that trip. But the one that really stood out on that trip, I can't remember which bookshop I got it in. I think I got it in the bookshop in York. But if not, might have been in the one in Carlisle. Can't quite remember. But it's a Folio Society edition of The Monk by Matthew Lewis. And it looks very plain in its case. And then you take it out and it's just really lovely. One of the most beautiful books that I own, and it's got just some really wonderful illustrations throughout. I haven't actually read this edition all the way through. I keep planning to, and just haven't got around to it. But it's just a really beautiful book, and it wasn't that expensive. Yeah, I was really pleased with that, because I know how much new Folio Society books can cost, and even some old ones, are still could be quite collectible. Some of the complete trollop folios can, I think, still set you back a fair bit. So yeah, that was a great find. And then number 7 is there something you saw in your used bookstore, and you regret not purchasing it? And it was I was in Troutmark Books in Cardiff, which for a long time has been my favourite bookshop, and I'd often go in there, and as you go into that bookshop, they've got the till is right there by the door as you go in. Behind the till are sort of collectible, old and sort of more rare books, and then just to the left of that then is you're sort of going a little further into the shop, but just facing you almost as you're coming in through the door is their poetry section. And so I'd often stop at the poetry section and not get any further and not buy anything else, not even explore the rest of the shop, because I'd fill my arms with poetry. And I can remember this one time I went in, I was not far from finishing university. I was doing a master's degree, and I knew that I didn't have a job lined up, and things were looking uncertain, and so I knew I had to kind of watch my money, and so I was trying to behave myself, and I kind of wanted to treat myself to a book, but didn't know exactly, I couldn't decide which one to get. And I eventually got a book called it's just called Orpheus by Don Patterson, which is his version of a kind of almost a translation of Sonnets to Orpheus by Rilke, and that was my sort of gateway into Rilke. But at that same visit, I saw, and I have to double check the exact title. It was, yeah, I think it was New Selected Poems 1968 to 1994 by Paul Muldoon, who is one of my favourite poets. And it was a big fat selection, a very generous selection of his work in that period. And at that point I hadn't read much of his early stuff. I only had a couple of his later collections, and so I wanted to, I was thinking about getting that, sort of fill in the gaps a bit, and then I didn't. I got Orpheus probably because it was cheaper, but I was kicking myself and I didn't get it, and then probably a month or two later, I went and visited it again, and it was gone. So I'd been kicking myself for a really long time about that. But then, just over a year ago, I found this, which is um, Selected Poems 1968 to 2014. It's not quite as generous a selection, but it covers, a bit more of a span of his career. And I still haven't read his first his first five collections, which are New Weather, Mules, Why Brownlee Left, Quoof, Meeting the British. But then I have read the next three, and then there are a couple of gaps then with his more recent ones, and so it gives me a good overview still of his career, a good way to revisit some poems I know, and explore some new ones that I don't know. And so I've managed to rectify it. I bought this again. I can't remember the name of the bookshop, but it was a great bookshop in Ambleside, in the Lake District, and they mainly sold new and remaindered books, which was really fun. I quite like buying remaindered books, it turns out. So there was a happy ending to that story with Paul Muldoon. Number 8 is there a book you are always on the hunt for in your used bookstore? And not really. That there are times that I am on the hunt for a certain book, and that hunt, it might last a few months, but more often than not, I either forget about it, or decide it's not that important, or I just buy it online if I can't find it anywhere else. For a long time, a good set of Proust's Remembrance of Things Past was on that list, and I did find it eventually, and probably took about a year or 2 years of searching to get an edition. So I have in the past, and but it's never gone on for that long. I don't have a white whale like that. Number 9 is if you could run your used bookstore for a day, what changes would you make? With the one that's closest to me, in the indoor market, I would, if I could run it for a night and a day, I would. Which is difficult because it's in a building that's locked up at night. That isn't just the bookstore. There are other business premises there, so it might be an issue doing this. But in an ideal world, I would go in the night before and reorganize everything, work out which books are just too beaten up or too obscure or just too highlighted or anything like that, and put them in a bin bag and throw them away, and just organise everything a little bit better and get things to look a little more homely and more approachable, I suppose. So that would be my ideal situation if I was able to run it for a day, and then I happily just chill. The cash register in this bookshop is, you wouldn't even know it was there if you didn't try to look for it, because it's just hidden in this maze of books. It's like something from Umberto Eco. It's quite entertaining in that way. Then number 10 is if you could go used book shopping with any booktubers in any city, who would you go with and where? I would probably love to go to Hay-on-Wye, which isn't a city, but I would love to go to Hay-on-Wye with any booktubers who happen to be there. Again, I don't live too far away, so if anyone's ever planning a special trip and would like to meet up, I'd be more than happy to. There are plenty of bookshops in Hay-on-Wye I've hardly scratched the surface of, and some I haven't even visited yet. I was watching Gavin from Genre Books talk about the Hayes Cinema bookshop, which I've never even been in. I've seen it from the outside, but I've never never been inside. So even for the sake of just exploring new bookshops with some amiable people, I'd like, yeah, I'd love to visit Hay-on-Wye with, yeah, really any booktubers or any um, booktube watchers that happen to be in the area. And then finally, number 11, tag some people. I would like to tag Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads, Emily Clarice Pessoa, Tilly from Tilly's Shelf, and Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. I don't believe any of you have done this tag yet. And so yeah, it'd be interesting to hear your answers, and if you're not into used books, then I don't know, just let me know why you don't like them maybe, or some of the things that you look for just generally in bookshops. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I decided to do this tag because I thought it would be a short one, but I've rambled on, so I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.